Hi everyone, and thank you for joining this HICS webinar. For this session, we are delighted to be welcoming Dr Elouise Epstein from Kearney and Lance Younger of ProcureTech to discuss the future of sourcing procurement technology. How do you source procurement tech in an agile way? This was the theme that we covered during our latest HICS Supplier Experience Community event. We asked both Elouise and Lance to share their thoughts around the topic, which is what we want to bring you today. Starting with Elouise, we asked, how should we start this approach to sourcing tech in an agile way?
One of the things that I do, and I'll just start with this story, I, I don't like to waste time with my clients. I don't like to waste their time. I don't like to waste their money, and I don't like to waste my time. So when it comes to sourcing ProcureTech, I have no tolerance to go through the 7-step process. To me, it's a waste of time. I think the source to pay market is artificially constructed and maintained. At the enterprise level for the companies that you all work for, there's really only two providers that are at the enterprise level, and that's SAP and Coupa, of course. All the other providers, they may be decent providers, but they are not legitimate enterprise providers. And so when I go into a client, and I'm working with a client right now, in fact, right at the top of the hour, I'm going to to talk to this client, and we just bypassed that whole RFP process and that pretend RFP process. And I said, look, you can either go with SAP or Coupa. It's your choice. I don't care. And so so that's when I talk about not wasting time. It's like, let's just cut to the chase. And so I use that as background because what I'm going to show you, I'm going to take you through 3 concepts that I want you to take away from today. Is that procurement needs its own architecture. The way we source procure tech has to be fundamentally different. And then I also want to just talk a little bit about the no-code, low-code revolution that's happening. And obviously that's a little bit more in my newer work, because that really gets to capabilities, as you'll see. All right, so I am known for this chart, and it is my signature piece. I don't think I can do a presentation without showing it, but I just really want to highlight the fact of the massive explosion in innovation. To say that this is like exploded is really an understatement. When the first version of this came out in 2017, there were like 10 logos on the screen. And people were freaking out then. So now, I mean, I have clients tell me that this is headache inducing. And that is partially deliberate, and it is headache inducing for me as well. But the point is collectively we have to understand what these solutions do. And we have to understand, and it's not the solution themselves. I like to say it's the labels, not the logos. You have to understand that each of these logos represents a net new capability, or at least a new separated capability that we've never had before, or at least been able to do in the way that we've talked about. So as you look at this, it's really important to read those labels. I have a separate version of this with just the label, not in a slightly different form, in a heat map format, but so you don't have to like copy down all the labels. But I draw your attention to just the risk and the ESG in the upper left and upper right respectively, because what we have to understand is if you're going to do risk management, you can't just buy one tool and by the way, just sidebar, I know some of these logos have been acquired, like this is going through an update right now. So so don't worry if you see, because I know Risk Methods got acquired and, et cetera, et cetera. So, but if you're going to do risk management, you can't just buy one tool like Risk Methods and just, call it a day. To do true risk management, you need at least 6, 7, 8 tools, and probably more. And I'll explain that in a moment. And the same is true for ESG. We tend to just go with a single ESG provider, perhaps just somebody that does ratings or perhaps decarbonization on demand, whatever it is, but that's not ESG. That doesn't facilitate an ESG program. And so we really have to look at what it is that we are doing within both of those umbrellas. And both of these are important because as we think about supplier experience, and certainly from an enterprise point of view, the greatest risks to your organizations come through your third parties, your suppliers. And the greatest opportunities for ESG come through your suppliers. And so we have to be able to get better at engaging with suppliers. When we talk about supplier experience, it is in service to not only negotiations, but risk, but ESG. And this is what we have to get really good at that we don't, we historically have not done. And buying one tool is not good enough. And so I'll come back to the sourcing and the buying of one tool versus multiple tools here in a minute. But I'll just note that for those that haven't seen this before, then the real question is who's going to be this platform in the middle? Who is going to stitch all of this together? And you can see that the four components of the middle are having a user experience, an app store, a data foundation, and intelligence. And I'm going to bring those to life. And perhaps the most important one, of course, is the user experience, because aside from a couple of people, 99% of people that access procurement systems will come through that user experience. And so that's what we have to really focus on. And we'll focus on that here. So when I ask clients, and I talk to clients every day, or at least every other day, and new clients, existing clients, future clients, past clients, I ask them, what's your procurement architecture? And I get one of two things. I get the source to pay, so source, source to contract, our sourcing tool, our contracting tool, our SRM tool, and procure to pay or rec to pay. This is where we do requisitioning. So I get like the end-to-end, and we use SAP for most of it, or whatever tool. So that's one thing I'll get. Or I will get I will get a Visio diagram with some SAP systems and some dotted lines going from here to there. That's not a procurement architecture. So if you take nothing else away, I want you to take this away, is that we need a procurement architecture. And so, I'm going to walk you through this. So when you think about who's going to access our systems, we have our internal, stakeholders, we have procurement ourselves, we have automation, we have perhaps what I would consider the most important one is the suppliers, and then of course leadership outside of procurement. And so these are our user archetypes. So we have to understand that that's who we're designing for. So every time a client tells me, oh, well, we use SAP's MDG, for master data management of our suppliers, I just laugh, because that's an old way of thinking about supplier management, because in the new world, we need to exchange data with suppliers. That's the goal. Ultimately, we have to exchange a lot of data, whether it's risk or ESG or inventory or capacity or supply. And so this is why historically those IT-led MDM solutions fail. So we have to take into account who is accessing our systems. Then we need this process orchestration and experience layer. And that's what I was just talking about a moment ago. How do we interact? How do people interact with our systems? And you see this with MRO a lot, where you might have 6 different MRO suppliers in a warehouse, in a manufacturing plant, because all that contracting of the MROs is at the plant level. And that's because we don't have good ways of accessing the information and the tools. And so you might have 6 different trucks arriving at that plant every day, each bringing different, the same types of goods, whether it's PPE or Gatorade or gloves or whatever. That it's because we don't have a good way for folks on that plant floor to communicate with our procurement systems. And if you actually looked at, and I'm just picking on sort of manufacturing and warehouse operations to make this point, but like the folks there are not going to go to an SAP system, go plunking through the search interface and try to figure out what they want. They need something that meets them, whether it's voice activated, whether it's tablet activated, that says, I need this right now. And I'm standing in the middle of a empty or, a full warehouse with noise and everything, because so many procurement systems were designed in, offices that assumed office workers making the requisitions. And so we have to start to change that paradigm. And so then once we do that, we also have to understand that everything we do is in the broader supply chain context. And I know if you're financial services, there are other, I know you're not doing manufacturing and logistics, but you have other supply chains, especially as with regard to IT. And so we have to understand that everything we do is within this broader context. And then this is where we get to, and don't worry, I'll tie this back to sourcing here in just 30 seconds, or who am I kidding, in 2 minutes, but where we have our rec-to-pay platform, and that's the backbone, because we still need to be able to raise purchase orders, collect invoices, and pay suppliers. So we have to do rec-to-pay. And then we have an app store with all those logos you saw on my previous slide, and we tie it all together with a supplier network. So that's very much what I've been talking about for 5-6 years now. But what I really want to push you to start to think about is the intelligence and how we create intelligence around all of this. And so on the right side of this architecture is data and analytics, and that we need price intelligence, supplier intelligence, category intelligence, and so forth. And I sort of walked you through risk and ESG. And this is taking external data, internal data, it's taking your underlying cloud platform, and it's actually doing data management collectively, because data management is a collective problem. It is not a group that sits in a closet to figure out the company's data governance. This is something that every single person in your organization needs to touch for procurement, in procurement. And so I know this is a lot, but when we start to look at procurement's technology architecture, and we start to think about what we do in this context, this allows us to go to market in a much more sophisticated way. If I'm going to market for a sourcing tool or a tail spend tool, or even a contracting tool, it sits on the left side of the screen, and that's good because that's where it belongs. But if I actually want to understand what the risk is posed by my top 100 suppliers, that's something that's going to be a little more bespoke and it's going to come from the right side of the screen. And the reason I spend the time to separate this out and get everybody to understand the user experience from the intelligence from the tools is, absent this, we tend to just lock in to buy an SAP or Coupa or whoever, or we buy them and then we buy another tool and then we buy another tool, and then we can't figure out why it all doesn't work together and tell us that, because the question we want to ask is, where's our risk, or where's our ESG opportunity? So this is a framework to understand that. And so if you take nothing away, I hope you take this. So now as we talk about sourcing, emerging tech, we understand that we're sourcing for the stuff on the left and perhaps the stuff that is below the rec-to-pay backbone. And so that really helps us to narrow our focus. And it also allows us to say, okay, so we have all these explosion of technology, and we have this sort of need to understand what it does, because a lot of it's new, a lot of it's just getting innovated. Seems like I wake up every day and see something new. And again, this is why I leverage Lance a lot, because there's so much happening. And so trying to do the 7-step sourcing process on all this emerging tech just doesn't work. And so I like to talk about moving away from RFPs to RFSs, or requests for solutions, and asking your providers to come together with a broader solution that is not just some piece of technology, but it's actually a broader solution. And I know I was not asked to say this, but if you actually think about where HICS has gone from being call it a supplier network, they've moved much more into being a broader solution. And I know this session is not about HICS, but I do think that is emblematic of one of one of the providers, and others have done this, where they're making the pivot to something broader, and it's getting into more solutioning. So that's why moving from RFPs to RFSs is so important. And so with that in mind, what we talk about is setting up a digital garage or a procurement garage. If you have read my book, I did a case on British Telecom, but you'll start to see, and I like to show this slide from Digital Procurement World, where just last year, where other folks are publicly talking about their digital garages. Now, everybody has a different term for it. It's structured differently, but the gist of it is that they're moving to this RFS kind of approach, where they bring solution providers in and work with them collaboratively in test and learns. They try it before they buy it. They work out how we might actually make this work in our environment versus simply buying the, again, monolithic system. And so here you actually don't even have to take my word for it. You can actually go back and watch these videos and see how they do this, how they set it up. The J&J one, he said publicly that we helped them. So I can tell you this, that we set up their digital garage and to really help them move away from just buying whatever SAP is selling. I'm picking on SAP as usual. And so what is a procurement garage? It is these things. I'm not going to belabor this, but I really want to point out that that this is creating this segment of innovation where you scan all of these companies, all of this whole explosion of startups, and sort of understand what they do and bring them in a constrained way. And one of the important things about the digital garage is that you engage the business. So it's not just procurement working on their own, but you have some business stakeholders as part of the garage that actually help to scope and define and actually work at all of these, what it is we're trying to achieve. And that's really what makes it successful. So if you decide to move forward with that solution provider, then you have the business already plugged in, and that increases the likelihood that it will get adopted. Now, it's also, I would make two other points. Time to value is 3 to 6 weeks. So you get one of these tools into the garage, you test them out, and if it doesn't, then if it doesn't work out, then you move on, and you've only spent 3 or 4 weeks. And failure is a big part of the garage. In fact, you'll have way more failures than you do have successes. And actually, I just got through writing a whole section in my new book about failing and failing fast, which is the big Silicon Valley buzzword. But what you have to take away, you can't fear the failure, and corporations do everything they can to eliminate failure. But failure is how we learn. And so the digital garage, it de-risks that failure. All right, and so that's my first 2 points. Hopefully the architecture, how we source ProcureTech. And my last one is really now getting much more focused. I'm going to pull back that user experience that I flagged a few minutes ago, and really talk about, we are entering the no-code, low-code revolution. And I desperately don't want to say ChatGPT, but I think it's entered the zeitgeist enough that I think we have to understand that you have these really sophisticated tools, and it doesn't matter what sits beneath it, but that it's making very complicated technology, very complicated machine learning technology available to any of us, and we can actually apply it in our lives. And so that's a big sort of, and I don't want to get on, those of you that know me know I don't like jumping on the bandwagon or cliches, but I just use that to frame up what I'm going to talk about now, because another one of those big innovations that's happened is the low code, no code approach. And no code and low code has been around for a long time. And it looks a lot like this. And so the big ones, so this is Zip, but there are a whole ton of these. And I'll be perfectly transparent. This is the only one I could find a screenshot of like 20 minutes before this started. So just to be perfectly transparent. But there are tons of no code, low code solutions. And what I want you to take away is that we have to get familiar with this, because remember the complexity of my spider map? We won't see that because we will basically create these workflows, drag and drop workflows, and all that complexity will get managed on the back end, managed through this tool. And again, just like ChatGPT can create a program, can code most of a program for you, like an actual application, these no-code, low-code solutions will do something similar in terms of process workflows and actually do the connectivity and the coding on in the background that allows us to deploy new procurement workflows, new procurement, let's call them mini apps. They're not, I wouldn't call them full-blown apps, but it brings much more capability to the end user much quicker. And so in essence, what I will state clearly, but is often left unsaid, is we don't need IT anymore. IT can put in the core system and be done. We don't need to ever rely or talk to them again. And so when you think about the procurement architecture, all of that sits within the IT fabric, and it gives us tools like this that allow us to run our operations without ever having to deal with IT. So that's really what I wanted to orient you to, those three concepts, because the way we interact with this technology is changing. So that means the skills that we need, hence my new manuscript about skills, is we have to start to get comfortable having the architecture discussion, having the, using these tools like these no-code, low-code tools.
So thanks there to Elouise for all those thoughts and lots of insights to digest as well. We put the same question to Lance Younger, CEO at ProcureTech, and here's what Lance had to say.
So over the next sort of 20-25 minutes, I'm going to do the same as Elouise, just talk through a few perspectives of how we're seeing organizations basically introduce more specifically digital innovation into their organizations. Typically, we're working with the procurement team to do this, and it's basically requiring a change in ways of working in an organization, but ultimately a new way of working that can be adopted within procurement that then can be applied across everything that procurement does as well. Whether that's the kind of the introduction of more agile ways of working, or indeed different ways of sort of engaging with the market as well. So first of all, just contextually, it's worthwhile just kind of setting the scene for what are the challenges that basically procurement face. And these statistics, I think, if anything, are on the low side. That from a procurement leader's perspective, they're faced with a market where it's very complex, it's moving very, very fast. There is still a high failure rate of digital transformation, and interesting enough, a move away from end-to-end platform providers. If anything, that's going to be accentuated over the next couple of years as we go through a recession as well. But then at the same time, many organizations are seeing digital transformation as being a fundamental of how they progress and how they move forward as well. And that for us boils down to two main things, and is what the focus of what ProcureTech is about as an organization, which is making stronger matches between leading corporates and innovative digital solutions, but most importantly, making sure that solution can scale as well. Some things that are both making it easier but also more challenging are, that there's, an explosion, as Elouise talked about, of new digital procurement categories and capabilities. there is a 99% chance that if you want something, it already exists in one form or another. It may not have existed 5 years ago. A blockchain for provenance of solutions, for example, it'll exist now. And if it doesn't exist, there's a chance that you can co-create very rapidly to make something exist as well. And that's this whole demand and supply, the second trend we call out as well, where that there are solutions, marketing and sales. There are literally thousands of solutions there, 20, 30,000. It's exploded, if anything. And that is still going to continue in the procurement space as well, solving unique issues and challenges, as well as combining things together to create the third trend here, which is best of breed ecosystems of solutions, which are basically brought together by you as organizations. That ecosystem will come to life both at the app level, but also at the data level over a period of time, and ultimately be delivered by the fourth trend, which is an integration of both technology and talent as well. Talent being more fundamental as well within here. The implications are that there is significant demand for digital solutions, and that's going to continue. There is a kind of an acute return on investment that organizations are driving for. There's going to be an increased supply of innovative solutions. There's still an incredible amount of funding that's going into this area, into ProcureTech in general as well. And however, there's a bit of a challenge internally within organizations, and hence the reference to garages, etc., to be able to find, supply, and manage digital solutions. And that's not just the scouting that we referred to. There's a kind of a new set of challenges that are happening here, whether it's the ability of these teams and capabilities to make a make versus buy decision, the ability to be able to manage a portfolio of solutions at scale, the ability to be able to manage your platform end to end, like a series of products or solutions over a period of time. And the capabilities to be able to do that are rare as well. And I've mentioned the complexity as well. So fundamentally, that's driving a different way of organizations operating. And we want to talk about that in a bit more detail now. So let's go to the next page, yeah. So we didn't choreograph it, but it was interesting that Elouise basically mentioned, you don't need an RFX, you need an RFS. And in our minds, you don't need a startup, you need solutions. And I take it a stage further is that, when we're working with organizations, we don't look at solutions. Well, we look at that, but we look at capabilities. So we're assessing basically different digital solutions in the fact, have they got the capability to supply things now, but also most importantly, have they got the capabilities to be able to scale and meet the requirements of an organization in the future? So yes, we see that as being critical, and we see that there's an end-to-end approach that organizations need to foster. It isn't orientated just around a scouting process, but it does need to be end-to-end. And that starts right at the front, which is basically understanding trends that are happening, whether it's changes in the technical architecture, the increased use of no-code, low-code, through to intelligence and insights that often come from academia and expert networks. And all of this feeds basically the ability of an organization to basically create their digital procurement strategy, the landscape, the architecture, the stack that they've got at the minute and where they want to go to, which ultimately drives basically the challenges and the scouting exercises that are worked through. Yes, I mean, it's still okay to be using an RFP if you want to, if the scope is very, very tight, very specific, and deploy that in basically in a waterfall approach. But what we're seeing in the majority of instances, you can make that approach, a lot lighter, a lot leaner, a lot more collaborative. by either using accelerators, incubators, venture studio approaches, engaging, leading digital solution providers earlier in the process to help you with the design, to help you with the future-proofing where you're going, and yes, then re-engaging them in immersion sessions to kind of educate your wider community before selecting a solution or solutions to go into either a design or build phase, creating a minimal viable product, and then stepping out into the projects and scaling rapidly as well. Best in class has kind of got basically agile at its core here, running in sprints and running epics, etc. As you go through as well. So a couple of other quick points on here as well is, we've talked about the garage or the organizational construct that sits below this. For different organizations, that can be defined as different things, but the important thing is that somebody within the organization does these activities. So some people, when they define their garage, it is literally just the scouting, and that's okay, as long as that person is connected into whoever is responsible for the digital procurement strategy and the feeds into that, and is also feeds into the basically what is ultimately implemented as well. The other thing that's important behind here is it's how the overall architecture is stacked together, from the visualization to the app layer to the data layer to the basically the middleware hardware, and how that all fits together, because the rhythm and beat of selecting those solutions, basically driven often by, especially the architecture driven by digital, basically can influence the speed to market that you've got as a corporate as well. So just double clicking on the kind of the accelerator side of things is that, what we've started to do is basically last year, it was the first time it'd been done anywhere, was create an accelerator format, taking sort of best practice from what VCs do when they're looking to invest in organizations, and pushing that back into procurement to say, well, you're investing your money in a piece of software, so how can we do that in the most optimal way, and do it in a cohort, both a cohort of digital solutions, but also a cohort of corporates, so you get that peer learning, the peer sharing before you go into the co-creation. It's meant to be light and lean at the start, looking for capabilities and inputs before you run through a co-creation and process through the accelerator itself. Yes, you do the classic selection activities of understanding the commercials and understanding the compliance to T's and C's and information security, but you go a stage further, working with the team that's ultimately going to deliver the solution, basically working with the CTO and the product owners from the digital solution providers. So ultimately you end up with a more comprehensive solution and a better fit for what you want when you kick off a project. You can, in the 7 weeks as well, basically move all the way through a proof of concept. If you've got open access to sandbox or to data, to branding, you can basically build out basically a proof of concept in those 7 weeks. So again, meant to be bringing as much forward as you can, so you can make a very kind of wise decision when you go to this go no go after the program finishes as well. I'd hasten to add as well, as you go through these types of processes, there's the opportunity to stop and either go faster or stop altogether. So you're not stepping out of the kind of the governance that you need, but you are kind of moving forward with it, hopefully at a good pace as well. The end goal for us as well, when we're looking at this ingestion or introduction of new digital solutions and new innovation, is fundamentally to basically establish high performing partnerships between a a digital solution and a corporate, because without that, you're not going to scale. You'll get a lovely solution which you'll run a couple of pilots and maybe do a phase one, but when it comes to being able to scale to a full deployment on a global basis across multiple different categories, you'll not be able to do it. And there's some key things that kind of pop up over and over again when it comes to kind of high performing partnership characteristics. Some of them are very obvious in terms of that strategy and C-suite alignment, but it has to be real, and it has to be engaged with on an ongoing basis. So once you've established your portfolio of solutions, how you align their strategy with yours going forward as well. There needs to be a fundamental technology compatibility. So this goes into, does the company want to work with organizations that are low code, no code? Do they want to work with organizations that just have AWS? Does the organization want to, basically only meet with certain integration requirements or information security requirements? So there needs to be an alignment with that as you're moving forward. Agility and flexibility are a given. There has to be a responsiveness. There has to be a customer-centric, user-centric focus, and an openness to share information about the roadmap, what's happening, and act on that, which refers to this kind of constant innovation. Part of the challenge, which you've seen, many of us have seen with, your Rebus of this world, is that the roadmap doesn't move fast enough against what a corporate's requirements are, and that has led to this ecosystem evolution. So when you're picking a solution provider, how do they maintain the innovation flow that you need, and without basically becoming a monolithic organization as well. So, the first few sets here are kind of, basically, obviously we talked about identifying the need, the strategy, encouraging, broad diversity of input before you kind of move on to basically creating those networks, creating a diverse technology scouting ecosystem, and then move on to kind of those, well, we just talked about point 9 here, new agile ways of working, operating practices, meeting the governance requirements, but often doing it in a slightly different way as well. And ultimately, basically, combining the best of fast, slow to kind of, build to last. As I go back to the introduction, a key part of, what we're passionate about is, yes, getting the right match in organizations, but then making sure that they can scale together, which, yes, means that corporate needs to scale, but then the digital solution needs to be able to scale as well.
So thanks again to both Elouise and Lance, and for more information, don't forget to visit us at hicks.com. Thanks for listening and have a great day.